something in a future day, but for now that's just a good overview. Let's begin the journey. We see the Lord now preparing the prophet and the people. We'll go through this relatively quickly because it's paralleling what we studied at the beginning of the book, but we'll just remember a few important things along the way. Verse 1 of chapter 33. He says, "And the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, speak to the sons of your people and say to them, if I bring a sword upon the land, and the people of the land take one man from among them and make him their watchman, and he sees the sword coming upon the land and blows on the trumpet and warns the people, then he who hears the sound of the trumpet and does not take warning, and a sword comes and takes him away, and his blood will be on his own head. He heard the sound of the trumpet, but he did not take warning. His blood will be on himself. But had he taken warning, he would have delivered his life. But if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet and the people are not warned, and a sword comes and takes a person from them, well, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood I will require from the watchman's hand. Now, as for you, son of man, I have appointed you a watchman for the house of Israel. So you will hear a message from my mouth and give them warning from me. When I say to the wicked, O wicked man, you will surely die, and you do not speak to warn the wicked from his way, well, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I will require from your hand. But if you, on your part, warn a wicked man to turn away from his way, and he does not turn away from his way, well, he will die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your life." All right, we'll pause. If you studied in the early chapters of this book, you'll remember some of this language. It's almost identical to what he said back in chapters 2 and 3. And as we studied back then, what God has said is that my prophet is like a watchman. Remember, a watchman is that sentinel who stands guard for a city, walking around the walls, and he sees something coming in the distance, an army, a sword, as the Lord says. And his job is not to go get a sword and fight. His job is to stand up there and say, yea, verily, something's coming. And that's his job. That's it. Done. Success. It's the responsibility of the people being warned to do something with that warning. And in verses 4 and 5, the Lord says to Ezekiel, if the people hear but don't heed, well, then they're going to suffer, but that fate is not on you. You did your job. You've obeyed. You've given the message. That's the mission of a prophet, certainly in Ezekiel's case, to open his mouth, to say what he's told. I would go a step further and say I think it's also the responsibility of a teacher, which is why James, I think, gives the warning that teachers ought to be careful about taking on that responsibility, because as the Lord says here, if you're not good in the watchman role and others fall because of your misdeeds, their blood's on you, so to speak. Their penalty is their own for their own sin's sake, but what the Lord is saying is you stumbled them in a sense because you didn't give them the fair warning I asked. And that's what he says in verses 8 and 9. He says, if he's given a word, but Ezekiel doesn't share it accurately, he's going to be held accountable. I love the fact that the book opens with that, both halves of it open with that, because it shows us that what Ezekiel was probably being given to do here, both in the first half, even in the second half at times, is something he probably didn't want to do in all cases. That what he was going to deliver was a message people didn't like to hear. If you don't like to tell people things that they won't want to hear, you should not get into ministry at any level, because people are inherently sinful. Their lives are corrupt and filled with sin, even believers. And the Bible stands to correct that over and over and over again for the whole time they live on earth. And if you can't get comfortable with the idea that in love and in kind ways, yes, but still directly telling them, the Bible says this, you're doing that, fix it, then you're not going to be good in ministry, because you're going to fall to the problem that God outlined here for Ezekiel, which is you're in a sense sharing in their sin by withholding the truth I gave you to share. I had a gentleman walk up to me after service on Saturday. You remember the stern warning I gave everyone about baptism, that loving way I said, get baptized or else? And here's a gentleman who's retired age, basically, coming up and saying, well, I was told by a pastor in my earlier days that because I was in a church at the time that practiced infant baptism, that was acceptable and I could just live with that as my baptism because that was the policy of that church. And I said, well, I don't know where they came up with that, but I'm here to tell you, you owe God a baptism and we need to do it, right? Well, he was okay with that, but before I told him, I didn't know if he'd be okay with that. And I'm not saying I should be given, praise for saying what's obvious. What I'm saying, though, is if any part of me was wondering, like, for example, what if this guy would have been a big donor to the church? Or what if he was a small group leader or, God forbid, an elder or something, right? What am I supposed to say? Ooh, well, in this case, maybe I should tell him something different, right? No. And that's the point. If you have a discomfort in telling people the truth, don't get into this line of work, because it's for your own best interest that you wouldn't. We need to tell people the truth. Now, we do it nicely, but sometimes there's no nice way to deliver a piece of news that they won't like. You just throw it out there. It's between them and God. And this is the same thing the Lord has told him at the beginning of this message.